All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Mindgasms podcast. Today I'm talking to my friend Cate Fogarty, who I met through Mixed Mental Arts, which I mention that all the time on my podcast now. But for those who don't know, it's an awesome podcast basically about idea sex with Brian Callen, the comedian and actor and head of the Callen Fate, and the awesome Hunter Motz, who is his awesome and super intelligent co-host. And yeah, so I guess you and I first started talking to each other on those mixed mental arts chats, and you were interested in my creative work, one of my short stories I remember after that poetry chat, which I really appreciated because I guess sometimes I'm a little more subconscious about my fiction creative work for some reason, so I'm less prone to telling people about it. So yeah, I really appreciated you being interested in that, and then we started talking to each other more from there, and now we're finally talking here on my YouTube channel. So yeah, that's
Yeah,
awesome. And why don't you just tell everyone a little bit about yourself there?
sure. First of all, thank you for having me. I'm super excited to get to talk to you one-on-one. My name is Cate Fogarty. I live in Los Angeles. I have lived here for 7 years now. I moved here from Norway, so I lived in Norway for a few years, and then before that, I lived in Minnesota. And before that, I moved around a lot, so around the US a lot and the Caribbean. So I've lived a lot of places. I'm a writer in my soul, and for money, I do massage. I was trained in shiatsu, which is a Japanese acupressure modality, and I do some work for mixed mental arts, mostly writing and trying to figure out content. And I am also a filmmaker trying to make a documentary. And yeah, I live here with my boyfriend and my two cats, and that's it in a nutshell, I guess.
Cool. So wait, where was it that you said that you lived before you moved to LA? The last place, was it Norway,
Norway.
you said?
Yeah, I
Oh,
lived in
oh,
Oslo,
okay.
Norway for
So
3 years.
3 years. Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
what was that like?
Well, it was wonderful. I was on vacation visiting a friend who was studying there, and I had never been to Scandinavia. I'd actually never been to Europe. That was my first time. And then I was planning to move somewhere. I wanted to move out of Minnesota. I wasn't really sure where. I was thinking San Francisco. And then when I went on this trip to visit her in Oslo, I was like, I want to move to Norway. And I got really lucky. And 4 months after I decided to move there, I moved there. I got a visa or a work permit actually, and a place to live, and moved to Oslo, and it was great. It's a beautiful country, full of very attractive Norwegians, and it's a social democracy, so they have socialized healthcare, and they're oil rich, and it's a small country. It's about, oh, is that your kitty? Hi, kitty. What a cutie. Is it a boy? Did I lose you? Can you hear me?
Oh, sorry, I was
Oh,
muted. I forgot to unmute
oh,
myself.
that's okay. That's okay. I thought maybe maybe your cat stole your breath and your voice. It's
No,
okay.
no, it's a girl. Her
Oh,
name is Molly.
oh, my best friend's name is Molly, so I love that name.
Oh, okay.
Well, I love cats too. I can't focus when there's a cat around because they take all my attention.
Yeah, she
So,
always she was trying to jump up on the table right now, which she often likes to do when I'm on the computer here.
oh. That's my cat does that too. I think they want your attention or
Yeah.
they want to get on the World Wide Web and look at porn. Cat porn. Um,
I bet there's a wide variety of cat porn.
oh, uh, I'm sure there is now that you say that, and I'm terrified. Um,
Yeah, I'm not saying that because I'm curious. I just bet that I
yeah,
just
if you think of it, it exists. What is it, Rule 42 or something? Um, yeah, so Norway was great. I made a lot of friends, had a good time, traveled Europe a little bit, and uh, discovered that I loved screenwriting, and so realized I needed to move to back to America to pursue that because I don't write in Norwegian, and that's really the only market for screenwriting they have there. So I went straight from Oslo to Los Angeles. And yeah.
So, what made you discover that you like screenwriting?
Uh, I was in Norway and feeling I took Norwegian classes. Everybody in Norway speaks English, so it's not that you can't communicate, but when you live in a country with your native language not 100% fluent, you feel a little limited. So I was feeling a little bit like I don't know how to explain it. Like I wasn't partaking 100% in life, I guess. And I always took writing classes in America. I've been writing since I was very young. And so I just happened to find an advertisement for screenwriting classes uh, in English, and I couldn't believe it. So I wrote the person and was like, is this really in English? And he was like, yes. And so I took those classes, and it was just a whole new medium that I hadn't really tried before. And I really loved it. There's a structure to screenwriting that's very unique from other types of writing. And so that and I love movies, and yeah, I just really fell in love with that style. And so because I'm very impulsive and feel like I can move anywhere whenever I want to, I was like, oh, I'll just move to Los Angeles. So, and I didn't like my job in Norway very much, and I'd been there for 3 years. Well, at this point, when I decided, probably about 2.5 years, and I was like starting to feel a little bit homesick and ready to go back to America. So yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, I love movies too. I actually like when I first got out of high school, I was considering either being a personal trainer because I loved working out already at that point, and either that or a film critic. And I actually got discouraged out of going into becoming a film critic because I bought this whole notion that, it doesn't pay enough money. It'll only pay like $20,000 a year unless you're really famous. So I just listened to the people around me and did not pursue that, unfortunately. Um,
Well, two things. First of all, it's never too late. You can always become a film critic. And now with the internet, everybody can be a film critic. My boyfriend has a podcast. It's not really a critic, like he's not really a critique, but he loves B horror movies from the 80s. So he talks about those movies. You can see some of them behind me. Um, and then, two, if you were to move to someplace like Los Angeles, you could combine those things super easy. Everybody here is a slash something entertainment. So I'm a massage therapist slash writer. Uh, Hunter is a tutor slash podcaster slash writer slash, intellectual superstar. But yeah.
yeah, I'm already a lot of those different things too. Like writer, podcaster, and tutor and stuff like that. And yeah, I already kind of do amateur film critique sometimes, I guess, like in my blogs and just on my YouTube channel. Okay, actually, I don't think I've done that on my YouTube channel, but I've written blogs a few times just about movies that I like and why I like them. And you know, like one of the things that I like a lot about my blog is that I just write about whatever I find interesting, and I have really eclectic interests. So I write about a lot of different topics, and I think like my interests have changed a little bit since back then too. Well, probably a lot since we're talking about when I was 17, so that's over a decade ago now. And I'm a very different person in a lot of ways from the way I was then. And like for example, I still had this mindset at that point that I had all the way through school that, you know, learning is boring. Why would you want to learn anything? Just go, like, you know, just work out and like watch movies and play video games and stuff. So it was like it was probably at least a few years after high school that I actually started to develop an interest in learning that gradually became an obsession. So I have more so-called intellectual interests right now, and that was also the period of time where I got interested in writing and started doing like creative work, like writing a novel, and then it gradually spiraled from there too to now I write a blog, and I'm still releasing chapters of my novel that I wrote on my blog and on my YouTube channel too. And I'm writing poems and sometimes essays and stuff like that for contests. So like basically I found my passion eventually. So I'm really
Yeah,
glad about that.
awesome. I think
And
that's awesome.
so did you move to LA because that's where Hollywood is?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you can make movies anywhere, especially now with the internet. But you know, Hollywood is still, I mean, maybe outside of Bollywood, which I was not going to move to India, but like Hollywood is still the epicenter of movie making as of now. Like, I would recommend anybody is that doesn't want to live in Los Angeles and wants to make movies to stay where they are, live wherever you want to live. I happen to love Los Angeles. Um, I came here, you know, like a lot of people that come here, it just seems so easy. Like, oh, I'll just show up, I'll write a couple screenplays, become a famous screenwriter slash director or whatever. Bim bam boom, there we go. And then you get here and you realize everybody here wants to do what you want to do. What you actually want to do is extremely difficult, which is why there's so few really, really good movies. It's not that everybody in Hollywood is evil and has bad taste. It's that actually making a really great movie is really difficult. Um, and then, you know, and then there's other layers to it too, like what will sell and all that stuff, who directs it, who acts in it. It's a, it's a, uh, it's a team sport. And so you could have the greatest basketball team and they're still going to lose some games, you know? That's how I think of it. But so, yeah, so I moved to Los Angeles because I was like, let's go straight to the source, straight to the epicenter. And I'd never been here, and I was like, well, it can't be any harder to live in Los Angeles than it was to move to a foreign country where I didn't speak the language and didn't really know anybody. So I moved here and immediately fell in love with it, and so I've stayed, and hopefully I will stay here a while longer. We'll see. You never know what's going to happen, but yeah, I moved here and then I started studying screenwriting. I have gone to enough college in my life. I don't want to go to any more university level schooling. And so I didn't go to film school. I just found a couple of teachers that I really liked and started taking their classes. Actually, one of the reasons I moved to Los Angeles is I was listening to a podcast by this woman, Pilar Alessandra, who is a screenwriting teacher. And I really liked her podcast. And I was like, I'll just move to Los Angeles and take her classes, like go to her actual classes. She had online classes that you could buy, but I wanted to like be there. So I did that, and then I studied with her, and then I met a different teacher that was really helpful to kind of help me progress to the next level, named Corey Mandel. And I studied for about, I would say a little around 2 years or so, maybe a little bit longer. And then I was like, okay, I should now start writing and not worrying so much about classes. And immediately decided to write a novel and not a movie. And so I've been working on a novel, and that takes up all my time mostly. And then this documentary kind of fell into my lap, the opportunity to make a documentary. So I started doing that. So I picked the two biggest possible, most difficult projects ever. Uh, and it was right now, smaller like sketches and maybe short screenplays, but I haven't written any features recently. So yeah, so it's funny. It's weird though, because studying all the screenwriting has really informed my fiction writing and helped with structuring my documentary. So it's not, I don't think of it as a waste. It's just I'm just going about it in a different order than maybe some other people would, which is how my life has always been. I've always done things a little bit out of order, which, it's fine for me.
Yeah, I think I'm similar to you in that sense. I always feel like I do things kind of out of order of the way most other people do them too, or arrive at things later than other people, or like think I'm interested in something and then get interested in something else and then eventually come back to the first thing or something like that. Like I don't know, it feels like my life is messy like that sometimes, but not in like a bad way. It ends up being a good way because it leads to good things mostly, I think. So what was it about the format of screenwriting in particular that appealed to you? And was it like the structure of like the 5-act story or something like that that helps with your writing your novel too?
Um, so so I think of screenwriting a little differently than maybe like the general idea, the general concept. Like it's generally, I think, a 3-act structure. Sometimes people call it like a 4-act because they break act 2 into 2 halves. I don't get so caught up on that part. Uh, what I really learned from Corey Mandel was how to structure conflict and how to make things more specific, how to really figure out goals. Characters need goals. How to create escalations, make things harder. So, I mean, if you want to really get into it, I can really expound on my whole idea of screenwriting. Uh, like I learned from Corey, who was really a great mentor for me, because I am a very, my life is like this kind of creative chaos all the time. Very empathic, very intuitive. It's like, oh, I just feel like going to Norway. I'm going to go to Norway. Maybe it's not a good idea financially. I'll figure it out later. Like I'm very much like that, where it's like, it feels right, so I'm going to do it. Whereas other people that we've talked, you were alluding to, are like, okay, here's my 5-year plan, here's my 10-year plan, bam, I do all this stuff. And both ways are right and both ways have problems. So it doesn't really matter. It's like it's your life, figure it out what works best for you. Some people get a lot of anxiety if they don't meet these goals at certain levels. I get anxiety from feeling like I am restricted by a timeline. So that's all to say that that's very much the kind of writer I am. I will write like 50 pages of a character and just like, I know everything that character thinks and feels and whatever. Nothing is happening for that character. Like they're not doing anything. I'm just like, oh, this is their childhood and blah, 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 whatever. And it's great for me. It's not always great for other people to read that because they're kind of like, okay, what what is going on with this character? Like where are they going? And that's so that's what Corey would call an intuitive writer, somebody that can create characters that are very interesting and fascinating, but doesn't always know how to put them into a structure so that they can leave my head and somebody else can fully appreciate that character or story or whatever. So what I learned from Corey was how to really structure it, how to get more specific. So I've created this great character. Great. What is the worst thing that could happen to them? Their car gets towed or something. Okay, great. Put them in the situation where their car gets towed. And then how do you make it worse? And how do you make it worse and worse and worse? And so learning that structure, which is super important in screenplays in general, are built around conflicts or mysteries, like escalations. Things go bad for people and then they get worse and worse and worse. Even comedies, like everything is just, how do we make it worse for the character? We either laugh at that or cry at it. And learning that tool informed my fiction writing because I would have great kind of feelings about a story or great ideas for characters. I never knew when the story was over. I would just write until I got tired and then end it and then do some rewriting, kind of figuring out, okay. And then sometimes people would read it and be like, this is really good, but it's missing something, but they could never tell me what it was missing. They would have different ideas. One person would say this, one person would say something else. And I would rewrite to fit into these different notes and it wouldn't necessarily make anything better. It was super frustrating. I would outline novel after novel. Like I had so many ideas for novels, but I could never complete it because somewhere halfway through I would get lost or I would just, I would be like, I don't know what I'm doing anymore. I wouldn't know how to rewrite it. I wouldn't have a plan. There'd still be good stuff in it, but it wasn't ever finished. It was almost like having like a half-finished sketch of something. It's like, it's not necessarily bad, but it's not completed. And I didn't know what I needed to do to complete it. So then when I started studying screenwriting and people think about the structure of screenwriting where it's like, okay, you have to hit this by 10 pages or 20, it used to be 25 pages, your inciting incident has to happen. And then it got moved to like 10 pages, your inciting incident has to happen. And that's basically all bullshit. Like it's all these rules that we've come up with because we don't really understand screenwriting. Because sure, there are great movies that follow that format, but there's a lot of great movies that don't follow that format. If you look at Fargo, which a lot of people love, the inciting incident doesn't happen until like way later. Like you get backstory, set up. And like then the inciting incident is way later. And people love that movie. The Coen brothers in general tell stories in a little bit different way than most people do. And so sometimes people hate them because they feel weird or different to them. I usually have to watch a Coen brothers movie at least twice. Like the first time I'm just trying to, I just watch it and just kind of like let it wash over me. And then the second time I can start to figure out what is actually the story. Like in Fargo, it ends like it almost seems anticlimactic because it's so easy for Marge to just, there's a killer, she takes him down, that's the end. And then she has that little speech with him in the car where it's like, all of this for money. Like, you did all this for money. Like, And then I think the actual last scene is with her husband about winning the stamp making contest. They use like one of his drawings or paintings for the stamp making contest. And you watch that movie and it's like, what? It doesn't even start with her. It starts with William H. Macy, and he's a car salesman. And you're kind of like, that's not how a lot of Hollywood movies work. It's like you start with the main character, you see their story, and then it ends. So this is all to say, if I get off track, just stop me. But this is all to say that you can have a great movie that doesn't follow this structure. So when I say structure, it's not hard and fast rules like, okay, you have to have a good guy, a bad guy. You have to hit the first inciting incident at page 10. You have to have your midpoint around page 50, blah, blah, blah. Like, you don't have to follow any of those rules. But because it's a visual medium, you have to, if you want to have more of a movie, you have to visualize those conflicts. We learn about characters not because we get all their backstory. We learn about them in action. We see what they do under conflict, under pressure. That's how we learn about characters in movies. In novels, you can write, okay, so Joe was born and his parents thought this and they named him this and blah, blah. You can give all that backstory. And so you start to create a character in a different way. So people confuse tools for rules, basically, in screenwriting. So my teacher, Corey, used to always say, there's no rules, but there's a lot of tools. And so when you're building a house, you're going to use more than a hammer. You're going to use a whole bunch of tools. Sometimes you need a hammer. Sometimes you need a saw. Sometimes you need, I don't know what else fuck people use for making houses. I've never made one, but you get the idea. And it's the same for screenwriting. So I was never given any tools like that for fiction. I read a lot of fiction. We talked a lot about theme and all this other stuff. And I just didn't know, like, when is a story over? It was always kind of this vague talking about like the denouement and the rising and falling action and blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, I don't know what any of that means. So then when I started studying screenwriting, which not everybody teaches it the way that my teacher taught it, but his method was super helpful for me. I was like, oh, I can use that in novel writing. I can use all of these ideas and still use the form of a novel where I can give backstory. I can jump around to different characters. I can be in and out. I can be an omniscient narrator. I can do all these different things that you can do with fiction, but also use the tools that I've learned from screenwriting to help structure it in a better way, or in a more easy to follow way, I guess. I don't know what the right term is, but a way where it's like, oh, now I understand where I want this story to end, because I have really thought about where I'm starting, where I want to go, and how I want to end. And I have a toolkit, like a compass, to guide me on that path. So when I first found screenwriting, it was really the relief of like, oh, there are tools that I can learn and I can practice, and they're going to, it's like a visual artist. It's like, oh, if I use a paintbrush, I'm going to get this kind of stroke. If I use a pencil, I'm going to get that kind of stroke. I never learned that in any of the writing classes that I took. That's not that people aren't teaching it, but I just never came across it until I pursued screenwriting. And so for me, it was just like, oh yeah, that makes so much sense. It was really a relief because I wanted to be a writer, and it was really frustrating because nobody could tell me how to do it. It was like, oh, you just write. You just write and write and write. And then all of a sudden it happens. And it was a frustrating feeling for me. So I don't know if that's similar to how you felt, or if you've had anything like that with writing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It made me think about a lot, actually. Um, well, like, in terms of lifestyle, I tend to get really obsessed with my routines and stuff like that. So like I'm more of the type of, okay, so I'm gonna do writing at this time every day, and I'm gonna do it for this number of hours, or I'm gonna do this many pages or this many chapters, or since right now I'm just editing my novel, I'll edit these 4 chapters today or something like that. And when I first started out writing, uh, I just had the idea, I should just try writing a book. I wonder if it would be fun. So it was more of an impulsive thing for me, which is actually kind of rare. And I've actually tried to make myself more impulsive because I get so attached to my routines that even if I don't even make a to-do list, I have this idea of I'm going to complete these tasks in my head every day, and I'll do all of them regardless of how long it takes. So one thing that I've been working on, especially more recently, is like trying to say, okay, do the important things, and then with the other stuff, do what sounds more fun to you, and you don't have to do every single thing every single day. And that's interesting because what you were saying made me think about that in terms of my writing process too, because when I first started, um, I wrote the whole first draft of my novel, and my my parents they love me too much to have said this to me until more recently, but they were saying that, Andrew, like at first in your first draft of your novel, it was good and it had an interesting plot and interesting characters and all that, but it was so verbose, and you tried to be like so crafty with your word variety and stuff like that, and like jumping back and forth between different perspectives of different characters and stuff like that, that it just like gets convoluted and hard to follow. So it was like really excessively verbose, and so deliberately complex that it was almost hard to follow at first. So one thing that I've been working on a lot for a long time now in terms of my writing process is to be more concise and to be less verbose, and to like not be so concerned with like using a wide variety of ostentatious wording and stuff like that, but use what words sound the best regardless of any other circumstances, and use them and make them fit together, and use the right words to make a smooth sentence that sounds the best when you read it in your head. And I think that particularly in fiction, I've gotten a lot better at that, at just being concise and stuff like that. And what you're saying about in terms of the structure is interesting too, because I even when I did my first draft of my novel, I think I did more of the kind of what sounds like what you're describing that Corey recommends as more of a style, like using tools but not looking at them as rules. Because I kind of tend to have the characters, introduce the characters, maybe have them talk sometimes, and then introduce conflict, and then, you know, just have thoughts happening occasionally during conflict or in lulls between the conflict, so you see their thoughts, and then sometimes there's more dialogue, but I kind of just bring it along with the story in ways that don't make it feel like they interrupt the flow of the plot. And I also like to like jump back and forth between different perspectives and then gradually like have flashbacks or something like that. But one thing I've done more recently in terms of using the right words and having a good plot, but also making sure that people don't get fucking confused, is like using characters' names more often and making it really clear about what I'm writing about, rather than like ostentatious and like I'm trying to be like fucking Shakespeare or Charles Dickens or something like that. So yeah, I just thought of all that with what you said, so that was really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I think sometimes the simplest way to say something is best. Not to say that I don't have the opposite problem sometimes where I'm a little too cut and dried.
Too much like Hemingway.
Yeah, like I sometimes have to be like, okay, what does it smell like? What does it, but I usually, writing is rewriting. I will just, like, now what I do or what I am doing for this novel, we'll see what I do for the next one. Who knows? Like, your process always changes and you update it. But for this one, what I did was I wrote an outline. I really spent a lot of time hammering out the main beats of that outline until I felt like they were really important and it put together a cohesive story line that I wanted to tell. And then I was like, okay, I've got my roadmap. I'm going to go out and try to. And so a lot for my first draft, knowing full well that a lot of it is going to get thrown out. Hemingway also said, or was it Hemingway? It might have been F. Scott Fitzgerald. Somebody said, some writer said, I write 175 pages to get one page, or 75 pages to get one good page, or something like that. Which I also was listening to the MMA podcast with Ed Solomon and Alex Kurtzman, screenwriters, where Ed Solomon says basically the same thing: is he will write 30 pages to get one or two good pages. So yeah, so I think, like, as much as you can, letting go of all worries for your first draft, the better. Like, write super verbose if you want. Like, you might write something like this crazy paragraph and then find one beautiful line, or that's how you find the right word, is by writing all around until you're like, no, it's not that way. It's not that way. It's this way. But the way that it's like, so sometimes I'll get very like verbose or ethereal almost, or like say things that don't really make sense, but I'm like, we'll just figure it out later. And I think Tom Robbins wrote that a sunset was like a pap smear or something, which, what the fuck does that mean? I don't even know. Like, pretty sure he's never had a pap smear, so I'm not even sure he even knows what it means. But he wrote it and it stuck in my head because it's like, what the fuck? So sometimes we write things and it's like, I don't know, like, whatever, and it just feels right. But so I'll just write something, and then when I go back, it's kind of like, yeah, that's too much, or that's not enough. I need to go back and figure out some more sensory, or flesh out this idea more. I kind of think of writing a first draft as cutting the cloth. So I'm just going to cut as much cloth as I kind of feel like I need, and then I'll go back and trim, or figure out like, hey, I need to add a section here, or whatever it is I need to do. So when I was younger, I was very much caught up in this whole like idea of the novelist with a capital T and an N, and how many words out of my thesaurus can I use, and how like impressive can I be? And as I've gotten older, to me, it's more, although I enjoy people that really have a great grasp of language, It's not so much important for me to do that. What I more care about is, uh, am I really creating a world that sucks other people in? And if I need some big words to do that, I will try to find those. But if I don't, I'll just keep it as concise as possible. It's just, maybe there's people out there that know what they're doing and are 100% like, this is the way you should do it. But I sincerely doubt it. I don't know. I've heard a lot of professional writers say that as well, where it's like, you're literally creating something out of nothing. There's no map. You have tools. That's all you can have, and do the best you can. And then once you've written it, this is the other thing that I learned from Corey Mandel, which is really helpful, is you write it and then you test it with people. You have your parents read it and they're like, I really love this, but I'm kind of confused by what's happening here. Or I feel like the language is a little overly verbose, it's a little tedious. Or I wish that you brought me into that world more with sense and color and whatever else. Like, you get people that you trust to read it and then you rewrite it again. That's literally what writing is. Like, you write something and then you test it with people and you rewrite it and then you rewrite it. The problem is, a lot of people think, and I used to think this way too, is like, you either know how to write or you don't. And you write it and you rewrite it yourself. You make some changes. But if you can't figure those out, then you don't know what you're doing. And now I'm like, nobody knows what they're doing. Everybody writes, shows it to somebody or a couple people that they trust, gets notes, thinks about it, watches movies, listens to music, reads other books, gets inspired other places, and just does the best they can. And then they move on and they do it again and again and again. And you get lucky sometimes, and sometimes you get help from other people, and sometimes you fail, but that's just the way it is. Writing is very much a process. And so if you don't like the process, you're not going to last very long in it, because I don't know. I mean, I guess you could write one-offs again and again and again, like, and get better that way. Everybody has their own way. But for me, I get kind of obsessed with a few stories that I just want to really figure out and work on them.
Yeah, like I kind of try to emulate more of the style of maybe someone like Chuck Palahniuk or something, or someone like that, like really stream of consciousness, because I feel like it's the it's the polar opposite of the way I tend to naturally write. But I think I've gotten good at that now, just from practicing it enough that I'm much better at just like being more concise in my wording, to the point where like when I edit it now, I don't have to do as much of it, and I don't have to put as much time or effort into editing it as I used to, I would say. And yeah, usually I read my writing to my mom, and she usually like gives me a lot of helpful editing suggestions. And she used to, I think she used to be the editor of her school newspaper in high school too. So she
Oh,
picked
that's
up
cool.
some, yeah, so she picked up some good habits from that. And yeah, like I just remembered too from what you said that I always like I never really got any formal training for writing or anything like that. I guess part of it is probably my ego or arrogance or something like that. But I just figured, like you were saying, like I don't want to be told like rules about how you should write and stuff. I just want to like write. Like, there's no rules for writing. People should write however they want to write. But I have read a few books here and there about how to write, and they do offer helpful advice sometimes too. But I've mostly just taught myself and figured out through a lot of trial and error, like I was talking about, that I just need to like what my major flaws are in my writing style and how to correct for those. So I'm always conscious of those. But then sometimes sometimes I overcorrect myself too, and I'll get too simplistic. So I have to make, so, you know, like the more you practice it, the more you find out that it's like, it's a delicate balancing act. You want to, you know, you want to be concise, but not too concise. You want to use the right words, but you don't want to sound like you're writing a children's book or something like that. And you want to use like good words, but you don't want to sound like too ostentatious. And you want to make sure you have the right arrangement of the right words to create the image or the feelings in the head of the reader that you want them to feel too. And another good thing about like having someone else read your writing too is that you can figure out not just your weaknesses but your strengths too. Like I figured out through reading my writing to my mom and everyone else that I've shared my writing with too, that my strengths in terms of like themes seem to be like darkness, like especially in my fiction writing. A lot of my short stories and my novel too are really like dark and fucked up, and they're about like killers or like killers or monsters or aliens or something like that. And I think it's like it's the way of like getting out get it's the way of like healthily getting out my dark thoughts and stuff like that in constructive ways through creativity. And so like for example, I remember I read this short story that I wrote one time to my mom, and it was called The Bike Ride. And it was about this guy he's trying to escape from the cops on a pedal bike, and they're chasing him on pedal bikes too through the woods for some reason. And you know, I try to create sympathy for the protagonist, like to make it seem like he's a victim and he's a fugitive wrongfully accused for something. And then the cops catch him and they beat him up. And then eventually I just suggest, I don't get explicit at all, that he kept children in his basement. So like that just creates all these even more dark possibilities than that in people's mind, to the point where when my mom read that, she thought that I was implying, and I kind of was, but I wanted the reader to go that extra little bit to come to that conclusion themselves, that he was a pedophile who kidnapped children and kept them in his basement. So when my mom first read that story, she looked at me and said, "Andrew, you're twisted."
That's awesome. You terrified your mother.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. Sometimes I write things that are super dark. I wrote a short story once that made everybody who read it super uncomfortable. Nothing like overtly terrible happened, but you know, I won't go into it. Maybe I'll find it and send it to you later, but it just like had a really dark undertone. And I think what really made people uncomfortable is they thought that it was a true story that had happened to me.
Oh. Oh wow.
Because one of the things that I do, so one of the writers that really influenced me as a kid, um, you know, I don't know how a lot of people feel about him. I kind of don't give a fuck about how people feel about writing. Like I'm not a snob. I'm like, I will read anything, and if I like it, I like it. If I don't, regardless of if it's quality or not. But that's my. Now I'm going to say this person's name, and everyone's going to be like, he's a good writer. But I was really influenced by John Irving when I was young. He wrote World According to Garp and the Hotel New Hampshire, and talk about like weird sexual things. Like he wrote a whole novel about a brother and sister that you know, are incesting. They're in love and they have sex, and the way that they cure themselves of this is one day just having sex as many times as possible. So but so what influenced me wasn't necessarily that. I don't I don't quite go to that level in my writing, but I read this quote that he said once where he was like, I start everything I write as an autobiography, and then I just start lying. And I do that as well. I am like ruthless about pulling facts from my life and making them fiction. And so I think sometimes uh stories that I'll write will seem like, I've had people say to me, "Oh, that must have really happened." And I'm like, "No, it did not happen." But uh it just seems so plausible, because basically I'm just a great liar. Like, it just seems so plausible because
That's what
I
good
will
writers
maybe
are,
start.
especially good fiction writers, right? Great liars.
Yeah, like I'm not great at necessarily lying off the cuff because I'm an introvert and I get kind of like, should I lie? Should I? Like, I get a little bit like, well, I feel like a detective would know right away if I was lying. But if I have thought about it, um, I can create a whole story. I mean, I threw a surprise birthday party for my boyfriend once. He had no idea, and I just kept like, this is this and this, and like just had an answer for everything. He's also maybe a little bit gullible, but if I've thought about it, if I've constructed the story, I'm really good at lying because I'm like, no, that's exactly what would happen, and this will answer this question. And I think of it almost like a chess game. It's like, whether or not I'm going to put all those details in the finished product, I want to know why things are happening. And that way I can draw in certain areas to give a little bit more authenticity to the story. And so I wrote this short story that really freaked everybody out because um, it was very dark, even though nothing specifically uh, overtly terrible happens, but it just has this feeling of just like, ugh. And I think everybody thought it had happened to me. And I remember having a teacher. I, I wrote it in this writing class, and then we read it for one of the workshops. And at the end of the class, he just kind of put his hand on my hand and was like, "Take care of yourself, okay?" And I was like, "Okay." Like, I'm not. That's not me. I'm not the character. Don't worry about me. I'm cool.
Yeah,
Um, but
I was talking to my brother about this recently because I've talked to him here on my YouTube channel too, and he's an actor, so he's like a different type of creative person,
yeah,
and like I was actually surprised that I had to explain to him that no, I don't get emotionally affected by my characters, like especially if I'm writing a novel or a short story and I'm writing about some dark shit like, contract killers or like aliens or monsters or like really dark and terrible shit happening. It's like I'm kind of like detached from it. Like
mm,
I'm just making shit up and I'm trying to make it feel real. Like I'm trying to make it feel put myself in the story, but understand that it's a story. I'm telling a
yeah,
story. And like so like you don't have to get like emotionally traumatized if you're writing about traumatizing stuff. Like um this reminded me too of what you were saying about screenplay. Oh wait, no, what you were saying about like suggested just being suggestible. Like it reminded me of like in is it Scarface? Yeah, I think it's Scarface where that that guy gets killed with a chainsaw, but at the moment when he gets killed with a chainsaw, the Brian De Palma gets the camera to pan to the corner, and all you see is blood spray on a wall. So it's
mhm,
just like you leave it up to the person's mind to imagine what's happening, and it makes it more disturbing. It's like how in Reservoir Dogs, uh, when Michael Madsen's character cuts that cop's ear off, at the moment that it happens, Quentin Tarantino gets the camera to pan into the corner. And I'm pretty sure he said that he was inspired by Brian De Palma in Scarface by that moment. And so he just pans into the corner and you just hear it happening. You don't even see it happening because it's like far off into the corner. And it makes it like, in my opinion anyway, more terrifying because you have to imagine what's happening.
Yeah, because sometimes the monster that you don't see is scarier than the monster that you do see. I mean, one of the reasons that Jaws, I think, is so scary is you don't see the shark that much because the shark that they made didn't work. So it wasn't necessarily that they were like, oh, it's going to be way scarier if we
really?
don't. Yeah, the animatronic or whatever didn't work very well. So they couldn't use it for that many shots. So they just had to like shoot around it, basically. There's a really great Steven Spielberg documentary that talks about it. I think it's in this new one, Spielberg. I don't know. My boyfriend's constantly, he's a filmmaker as well. He's constantly watching documentaries, and I'll walk in and out, or not really documentaries, but more like DVD extras where the filmmakers are talking about it. And I'll walk in and out of the room. So I don't always know where stuff comes from, but yeah, but that's with Jaws. And then, you know, Alfred Hitchcock was pretty well known for that too. I think it was Dial M for Murder, where you see Grace Kelly's hands as she's being strangled, but you don't actually see her get strangled. Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's necessity because the shark doesn't work, or they can't shoot it, or, you know, whatever. And sometimes it's like, no, it's actually scarier if you don't see it, if you don't see the monster, or whatever is happening, the action. And then there's Nathaniel Hawthorne, who in The Scarlet Letter, one of my favorite lines, because he's like Hester Prynne and the minister, I can't remember his name, go off to have sex in the woods or whatever, and all was spoken. That's all he says. You know, it's like we all know what he's talking about. That's all you need. So yeah, so I think a lot of times less is more. And then sometimes it just depends, you know, like sometimes it is great to be there in every detail and really break down the moments and what's going on. I think there's a novel, which I haven't read, that is literally takes place from the time a bullet leaves a gun to when it hits somebody. Like, I've heard about this novel and I can't think of it off the top of my head. I haven't read it, but I mean,
that sounds really interesting.
That's a novel in less than a minute, over the period of less than a minute, you know. Or like Bright Lights, Big City, I think is one day. I think, I can't remember. It's been a long time since I've read that. But one thing I wanted to say is what we were talking about, where this darkness and whatever, I think writing is super cathartic. So I do get affected by my characters. I mean, there's times where I'm writing and I'm in their brain or in their consciousness or whatever, and I'm crying or I'm pissed or whatever it is. But then when I stop writing, it's gone. Like, I don't carry that with me the way that I feel like sometimes actors do. I've heard actors talk about they get into a role and then they can't stop being that. You know, Jim Carrey talked about that a lot with Andy Kaufman when he did Man in the Moon. He couldn't stop being that character. And I think that's just it's a different medium, a different process. I'm not an actor, so I don't really think about that stuff. But I will say that when I'm reading a book or writing a character, especially if they're different than me, I do start to think in that way a little bit. So I get affected by them, but it's not to the point where it's, you know, if I'm writing about a drug addict, all of a sudden I'm going to become a drug addict or, you know, whatever. Because for me, writing has a different kind of cathartic process. So I can write all this darkness or sadness or whatever, and then I, as Cate Fogarty, feel better afterwards because I have let that out. Because one of the things I do is all of my characters are me. They're all versions of me. I'm writing a novel right now. It's a family. And sometimes I imagine my family reading this novel and being like, is that supposed to be me? and me saying, no, it's supposed to be me. All these characters are me. Like all these characters I empathize with. I didn't do everything that they're doing. I didn't live the lives that they live, but you know, my main character is over like the frustration of his life is that he can't finish his dream, which is to build a sailboat. He's got this unfinished sailboat in his backyard, and that feeling of like, am I ever going to get this done? And I'm literally writing a novel and making a documentary, two extremely difficult creative tasks, especially for a perfectionist who can't just like do it and be done with it. Like I have to try to make it good. And so I know how that feels to feel like you have this looming project over you all the time. When am I going to finish it? I told everybody I was going to do this. Everybody sees this, that I haven't finished it. You know, that feeling like that is me. So I get affected by my characters, but at the same time, I get to release those built up emotions and feelings and give them a life and a home somewhere else outside of myself. So, you know, David Lynch is really into transcendental meditation. And he talked about, he used to think that to write good stories, you had to be depressed, you had to whatever, all this stuff. And then through meditation, he realized you don't need that. Like, you need to be able to access those feelings. You need to be able to draw upon, like a painter, you need to be able to draw on any color you want, but you don't have to hold them inside you. And I think a lot of people, you know, it's that same idea with the structure of a screenplay. We see a movie and then we start making rules about it. And we're like, okay, you have to do this. You have to do this because we liked this one movie that did it this way. So now all movies have to do it that way. So we like Hemingway, who is an alcoholic. All of a sudden, you have to be, and he committed suicide. All of a sudden, you have to be suicidal and an alcoholic to be a good writer. And it's bullshit. Like, to be a good artist, I think you need to access the wide variety of human emotion. And sometimes that means experiencing it for yourself, but you don't have to live there. You don't have to be a pedophile who keeps kids in his basement to write a good story about a pedophile who keeps kids in his basement. So that's one of my pet peeves, is when people are like, oh, to be truly creative, you have to be tortured. I think, no, if you are living life, you are probably tortured at some point or other, because life is hard and we live on a planet where we're constantly making things harder. So that's my soapbox about creativity and depression and darkness. Like, yeah. And I think too, with Americans and probably Canadians and Westerners in general, we get very much like fixated on the you're all or nothing. You're either all happy or you're all depressed or you're all this or all that. And it's like, no, thanks. I don't want to live my life that way. So
Yeah. I mean, I of course find writing really cathartic too. I think that um I think that it's maybe because like maybe well, maybe at least one of the reasons that I'm attracted to writing like such dark shit is like I tend to be a really depressive and pessimistic person, which is always something that I'm trying to work on myself. So like I think that maybe like because I always just go with intuitively whatever I feel like writing about. I think I just intuitively go to that sometimes because like it's my way of like imagining scenarios that are way more dark than my own life, and it kind of like helps me put things into perspective, because I realize, like, holy shit, things could be a hell of a lot fucking worse than they are. But I mean, sometimes I write like happy stuff too. Like I guess the only poem that I wrote that actually won an award was actually about, well, it was like about uh, more positive stuff than what I normally write about. But I mean, also, yeah, like what you were saying is true. I think about being a good writer. To be a good writer, you have to like invent these characters, and then you have to like really imagine that you are them, and you have to imagine how they're feeling, and you have to like describe the way that this person that you invented feels. And it's like, look, I've talked to my brother about this before too, because he's also working on writing some screenplays, and he does more work in film and television and stage acting and stuff like that. I've talked with him recently about how, that's a more collaborative process, and it seems like they're different mediums, of course, so there are different things that are difficult about them, and there are different things that are easier about one medium than the other. But to me, it seems way more difficult to make a film, because there are so many people involved, and they have to agree enough on how it's going to be executed. And again, maybe I'm biased because I'm a writer, but the reason I like writing so much is that like I'm like a god basically when I'm writing a novel or when I'm writing a short story. I decide that things happen. I create these people. I make things happen to them that I want to happen to them, and I show the audience whatever I want them to see. I might, I might, I might, I might hide some stuff. I might throw some stuff in their faces. I control how the audience feels, or how
Yeah.
the readers feel.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely I don't really think of it that way, but I
I'm not
understand.
like
I
thinking of
understand
it
that.
that way when I'm writing. I'm
Oh
just
no,
saying
of
you could
course.
look at it that way.
Yeah, I mean, so two things. Like in some ways, I think writing a novel or a short story is definitely way easier than making a film. Um, Making a film, like you said, is collaborative. It's expensive. Writing a novel is pretty cheap. You just need either some, way to write it and the time to write it. Uh, uh, but it's generally it's you and the blank page, and so all you have is yourself. It's instead of going on a journey with 50 people where it's like, oh, that person has one talent that I can draw on and another talent, whatever. It's like you are the god, you are the controller of that world, and it kind of all rests on you. Of course, nobody really does anything by themselves, so you write a draft and then you can get help from other people and all that. But in general, it's a solitary enterprise. I think of writing more, and I love all different kinds of writing. Um, so I'm not like I find it all, I think of it all the same way. I find it like a puzzle that I'm trying to solve. So I might get like some pieces here, and I don't know where the pieces come from, that my brain essentially, but it's like this and this, and I'm going to try and put these all together. And now I have to work to figure out what I'm making, because it's a puzzle that I haven't figured out. So even when I'm writing knowledge bombs for the Mixed Mental Arts website, it's like, okay, I have to figure, I always do better creatively if I have restrictions. Like if you give me the world, I get overwhelmed by decision making sometimes. Hunter will tell you that when we go out to restaurants, I almost never order food. I just make him order. because there's certain decisions that I don't care enough about. I'm just like, what are you eating? And he'll tell me, no, I'm like, that sounds good. That's what I'll get. About, I would say 85% of the time, that's what happens. But, and like, I don't like to think about too much what I'm going to wear to like for clothes. Like, luckily my jobs, I basically wear t-shirts and stretch pants. And like, if I have to get more thought put into what I'm wearing, it makes me a little crazy, because when you're a writer, you're constantly making these decisions all the time. You have to decide. Every word is a choice, right? It's not necessarily written in stone. You can't change it later, but you are making choices and trying to carve this statue out of marble. So I like to limit the amount of choices I make. I don't really care about food or clothes that much, so I limit those choices. So when I get even more limits, like with screenwriting, it's like, okay, generally a feature is 90 minutes to 2 hours. So this is how much room you have. This is how much real estate of writing you have. These are the things we can show on screen that are going to make sense. Like, you get restrictions. So that's part of why I like it. It's almost like why some people maybe like writing haikus or sonnets that have rules to them, because for me, the restrictions help me be more creative. I always have to like bend the rules a little bit because I don't want to be too restricted, but I do like having some parameters. So I don't think of it as being a god of a world. I think of it more as like, okay, I've got these pieces of this puzzle, and now I have to figure out how to put them together. So like I was saying with the knowledge bombs, I've made this fake rule that they have to be 500 words or less. So I know I have to get this idea out in 500 words or less, and I want to do it in a story format or some kind of metaphor so that people understand this is the idea, and they're going to have a story to go along with it so they remember it. I want it short so it takes them less than 5 minutes to read it. I want the story so that they remember it. So I create these restrictions, and then it's like a puzzle that I have to figure out. So that's kind of how I think of writing, whether it's a screenplay or a short story or a novel or a knowledge bomb for mixed mental arts. The problem with the novel for the longest time is I didn't know what those restrictions were. I didn't have any tools. I didn't know how to build a house. I just kind of had this vague idea of a house and thought, oh, maybe it'd be cool if there was like this room up there somewhere or whatever. And then I would get frustrated because I was like, I have no tools. I don't know how to fix this house or build this house. And so I just got tools from screenwriting, and now I've brought them over to noveling. That's a verb I made up. Writing novels, and
I do noveling too.
Yeah. And so it makes my life easier. But that's not to say that it isn't really cool to be like, I have created this world. I have given birth to this world and these characters, or whatever metaphor you like to think of it as. I don't know if you've ever seen the Randy Pausch's last lecture. I recommend looking it up on YouTube. It's this professor. I can send you the link later. It's a professor who taught at Carnegie Mellon University, and they had a lecture series called Last Lecture. Like, what is the last lecture? If you could give one lecture, what's the one last lecture of your life? What would the lecture be? And he did it. They had changed the name, but he did it when he had 3 months to live from cancer. Like, he was literally dying. So it was literally his last lecture. And he gave this really wonderful lecture about making your dreams come true. And he goes through all of his childhood dreams and how he accomplished them, or if he didn't accomplish them, the lessons that he learned, things like that. And I lost my train of thought. Maybe it'll come back to me.
His last lecture when he had cancer.
Yeah, his last lecture, and about the power. Oh, that's what it is. Thank you. So I watched this, and he talks about like all his different childhood dreams or whatever. And I think back to what my childhood dreams were. I wanted to be a witch, like on Bewitched. I wanted to be Samantha. And I wanted to be like, I don't know. I didn't know that writers wrote movies. I thought that directors and actors just got together and made something. Like they just spontaneously made something. I didn't understand that somebody actually wrote a script and that a script became a movie. Because as a kid, I didn't see scripts. I saw books, I saw poems, and I saw movies. So I just thought, oh yeah, they just show up with a camera and film it. But I was obsessed with, we had a video camera. I was obsessed with making things like that. And I'm like, what was being a witch about? Being a witch was that I felt powerless and I wanted to have power to make magical things happen. That's what a writer and a filmmaker does, basically. You know, we create worlds, we pull people into other characters' lives and put them in different time periods and all of that. So watching that.
A lot of it is about psychology, right?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I don't think of it so formally, I guess. I've never really studied psychology. I've had a lot of therapy though.
Yeah, I mean like how you have to make readers believe that the characters that you created are feeling genuine emotions that you yourself are not necessarily actually feeling.
Yeah.
So you
Or
almost have to have like an intuitive understanding of what particular emotions feel like.
yeah, for sure. I think a lot of people maybe think of it that way. For me, I am creating a person that I'm going to introduce the audience to. They can feel however they want to feel about that person, you know? They can feel like that person's an asshole, or they can feel like that person is misunderstood, manipulated a little bit with how I feel about that character. Like I can choose what to show and what to hide, but ultimately the story exists in the reader's brain, and there's only so much I can do about that. I you know if like so with screenwriting and also writing fiction as well, it's like if I write something and then I test it with somebody and they tell me the story that they have in their head, so they read it, whether it's a screenplay, or it happens less with the novel, it's more with the screenplay because it's a different medium. But when they tell me the story that they saw, the movie that they saw, and it's completely different than the one that I saw that I wrote, that's a problem. And then I have to go back and figure out, okay, what did I do or not do that didn't adequately show them the movie that I saw? If they tell me the story back and it's, essentially the same story, same movie, but they have completely different feelings about it, that's okay with me. Like, this novel that I'm working on, this guy has an affair. He cheats on his wife. And if people read that and they're just like, what an asshole that he cheated on his wife, that's okay. As long as they understand what's going on, why he did it, things like that, that's fine. I don't necessarily need everybody to like all of my characters or feel the way that I feel about them. Because all of my characters are pieces of me, I have deep empathy for them. That doesn't mean that I like everything they do or agree with everything they do, but I care about all of them. And so, my teacher said one thing to me that really has resonated, and he said, writing is an energy transference business. So if you write somebody that you're just like, okay, I'm going to write this character and these are the elements that go into him and this is what he does and blah, 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 and you feel nothing for that character, a lot of times the reader can feel that. and they don't feel anything for the character. And I think that a lot of times that's what happens when people are like, it was cardboard characters, I didn't, whatever. I'm like, if you go back to the writer and you say, how did you feel about this character? And you really ask them and they're honest about it, I think 9 times out of 10, they're going to say, yeah, I guess I didn't really care about that character. And it's like, yeah. And that's why the audience didn't either, or your reader didn't either, because you didn't give life, you didn't give a soul to that character. You didn't, you didn't give the energy to that character.
Yeah, I feel the same way about that. Like, what's important is to have the readers understand what's going on and understand how the characters feel. And I empathize with all of my characters too, even if they're characters I create who I think are like fucking morally reprehensible. Like,
Yeah.
just empathize in the sense that I want to imagine that I actually am that person, so that I can realistically communicate how they actually feel in a way where, the readers understand how the characters feel, regardless of whether they like the characters not, just like you were saying too.
Yeah.
To go back to what you were saying way at the beginning, because we could talk about writing more if you want to, of course, but just to talk about other things too. um you were saying that you were telling me before recently too about how about traditional Chinese medicine and shiatsu massage and acupuncture and stuff like that. And I was telling you too about how um like well, basically, my thoughts on things like that are, we have this kind of bias against that kind of stuff in Western culture. Like, it's not modern medicine, therefore it's just like woo-woo bullshit or something like that. And, sometimes sometimes that's probably true. They're like snake oil salespeople or something like that. But obviously, like, stuff like that has been working in Asian cultures for a really long time. And maybe some of it was placebo, but clearly some of it actually works. And I was telling you too about how when I was a child, I had really bad eczema on my hands, like to the point where they would crack and bleed in the winter sometimes. And the only thing that eventually actually worked was when I got acupuncture treatments for it.
Yeah.
And I did that because my mom's had chronic pain for a long time, and she eventually figured out that one of the things that helps for her is acupuncture for relieving some of her pain too. So that's why I got that done. And now, like, you can see my hands look fairly normal now.
They look great.
So so they don't get, like, sometimes they still get dry in the winter, but they never like crack or bleed or anything like that anymore. And it was a long time ago that I stopped getting acupuncture for it. So I mean, obviously, like, these things have, as you obviously understand a lot better than me, these things have more merit than a lot of people seem to think that they do generally in Western culture, I would say.
Yeah. So, so I would say yes. Like, from my perspective, it's so arrogant for people in the West to be like, well, there's no scientific evidence of this working, so I'm not going to believe it. When traditional Chinese medicine, I'm not the greatest with the history, but basically, Chinese medicine has been around for 5,000 plus years. Uh, a lot of people have been using it for a long time, and they're not morons. They're not going to keep using something that isn't working. That's not to say that it works 100% all the time, but neither does Western medicine. So that's that. Traditional Chinese medicine, after the Cultural Revolution, I believe, when the communists took over, a lot of the traditional aspects, things were thrown out. I
didn't know that.
Yeah, a lot of it was lost. And so, but they didn't get rid of all of it because they were like, you know what, some of this is really important. We're going to keep it. So they codified it under traditional Chinese medicine, or TCM. And I don't know all the history. You'd have to talk to like Isaiah Gooley or Nate Foreman. Those guys know a lot more about China and things like that. But from what I understand is a lot of the traditional stuff was lost, but they kept a good section of it. And so all like the Chinese medicine was written by these doctors. For each dynasty had like a bunch of doctors, court doctors, and they would observe things and write them down, and it was just passed on and on and on. And so when the communists came, they went through them and they were like, nope, yep, whatever. So they kind of pick and chose what was going to be kept. So some of the stuff that was gotten rid of has survived, like secretly. But in general, traditional Chinese medicine is what came out of that revolution. So that's just to say that, like, it's not like a bunch of woo-woos got together and have just been like, yeah, this works. It's like it has gone through a lot of scrutiny, not necessarily what we think of as the scientific method, but there has been
maybe unorganized empirical study.
Yeah. And now people are trying to study it more. It's one of those things where it's hard to design studies around a lot of this stuff because in Chinese medicine, it's not so like they wouldn't look at you and say, oh, you have eczema. They would, this is probably what happened to you. They took your pulses. They looked at your tongue. They look at the color of your face, your ears. They look at your whole body to figure out where the imbalances are. So you and I both have eczema, and you have it because you have, I don't know, hot dampness or something. I have it because I just have dampness, let's say. Like, I'm just making this stuff up. So those are different imbalances in Chinese medicine. We might be treated with some things that are similar, but because you have that heat that I don't necessarily have, you're going to get a slightly different treatment than I'm going to get. In Western medicine in general, it's like, okay, you have eczema, here's the cream, here's the pill, here, it's like, it's on your hand. We're going to treat this area. We're not going to worry about
everyone, right? Cookie cutter solution.
Yeah. And then we find out it doesn't. And it's like, well, it's, blah, blah, blah. And instead of being like, okay, maybe another modality or another mindset that looks at the whole body might be a better way to treat some of these things. We're just like, oh, sorry, there's no help for you. Move on, and that's what a lot of people get. I think it's changing. I think more and more on both sides are bringing the two together. And that's really what is exciting. I know because I'm in massage therapy and no acupuncture stuff, there's plenty of people here that go the opposite direction. They still have that atomistic mindset, but they, it's that whole idea of like, you stop being super Christian and then you become super atheist. It's like,
Which
still have that.
To me.
Oh, did it?
Yeah.
Are you super atheist or super Christian now?
Oh no, I actually.
Oh wait, no, you were talking about that on the Yellow Belt chat about how you had all this naive realism. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was raised Christian, and then I gradually became an agnostic, and then an atheist, and then a militant atheist, because I blamed religion for all of these problems that were a lot more complicated than religion, and, didn't realize that religion was not necessarily anywhere near as much of a problem as the militant atheists make it out to be.
Yeah. Well, it's because it's all an ideology. It doesn't matter what the philosophy is. It doesn't matter if you're religious or not religious. If you have that fixed mindset of like, it's all or nothing, one thing's wrong and one thing's right, it doesn't matter. And that's what happens with a lot of people here. They look at Western medicine and they're like, it's terrible. It's killed somebody in their family probably. So they have a good reason. They have a strong emotional reason to hate it. And they go the opposite direction where it's like only Eastern medicine. Or whatever it is. I'm only going to do herbs and oils and whatever. And it's like, that's great. Unless
I'm gonna have my water birth in a flowing river.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, or I'm going to have raw water or whatever. It's like, we start to lose common sense and we just go one extreme to the other. We do it in everything. And so what's really exciting, and I just listened to the Don May Mixed Mental Arts podcast from way back. I was catching up, where he talks a lot about Chinese medicine and how these two different medicines work best when you bring them together because they're tools, not rules. So sometimes you have a broken bone and you need to have a cast for that bone. But you can also use these herbs that are going to help your bone heal faster. The best way to cure cancer is to prevent it. So you do all these things to prevent cancer, but then when you get it, maybe you need to have the tumor removed or you need to have surgery. So all Chinese medicine or all Western medicine, there's holes in both. And so when you bring them together, it's the best. But did you want me to give you a quick overview of TCM or?
Yeah, sure.
So it's a holistic view of the body. I'm definitely not an expert, and there's different theories in Chinese medicine. There's 5-element is one version. So that would be heat, cold, damp, dryness, and wind, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly. It's been a long time since I was school. So they're just, what those mean are just symbols for things that they observe. So wind, for instance, is it can be like if you have a stroke and you lose the ability to move half of your face, you had an attack of wind. It's very complicated, but it's all related to how these affect different organs in your body. If you're out and it's a very windy day, like literally a windy day, you're going to get a sore neck. And like everybody can observe this. If you sleep under a fan, you're going to wake up with a sore neck. You're literally being attacked by wind. It affects your liver. Your neck relates to your liver. So it's just
how does it affect your liver?
So not your actual liver in your body. It's the symbolic organ in traditional Chinese medicine. So they talk about the spleen, the stomach, the liver, the heart, the small intestine, the large intestine, the triple burner. That's not an organ in our bodies, but that's what they call it. Because they didn't really do anatomy studies. They weren't interested in cutting up bodies and looking inside because that would break the whole. It's a very holistic idea. So they observed what was going on and came up with this very fascinating, very poetic explanation of the body where, your blood you create blood in your body in Chinese medicine by taking in food, which goes into your stomach. It gets processed through your spleen. It gets some energy from your lungs. and it gets all like, if I'm remembering this properly, it gets all mixed up in your spleen, and that's where you make blood. That's not literally how blood is made in the human body, but that's how they see it work in the Chinese medicine. And it doesn't matter that it's not literal, because all of the aspects that they have assigned to the spleen, for instance, are pretty right on. So what that means is your spleen is affected by cold and damp. So the more cold, damp foods you eat, or the more cold, damp like environment you feel, it's going to hurt your ability to make blood. So one way to figure this out is, if you see people that are all about like a raw food diet and don't eat meat, so it's all like raw vegetables, and you can only cook it to this amount of time or whatever, or this temperature, a lot of them are anemic, or very, maybe not like clinically anemic, but like very lethargic and slow and get tired after eating, like all of these things. This is all a system, like this is all the understanding of what the spleen does for your body. So they've been overeating cold, damp food, and now their spleen energy is deficient, and the spleen gives you energy and makes your blood. So I don't know if that makes sense. It's very
Oh, okay.
complicated.
So it's like it's like a different path to the same conclusion almost.
Yeah.
Like it's a different explanation for why like being on a raw food vegan diet can make you anemic, and by causing you to not have enough iron because you don't have enough
Yes.
protein or something like that, right?
Yes. And even more than that, it doesn't, it sometimes takes you to an explanation that Western medicine doesn't give you, because Western medicine isn't looking at your diet usually in that kind of way. Like more and more we are, but
Yeah, that's for
it's
sure.
like, if you're anemic, let's figure out, what do you need? B12 shots or something? I don't even know how they treat anemia. Iron, something like the one, give that to try to fix this problem. We don't look at the whole. And so, so there's some conditions that Western medicine doesn't really understand properly, but Chinese medicine does, because it doesn't look at them as a problem. It looks at the person and figures out the imbalances in that person and treats the whole person. So it's kind of a dichotomy, like Western medicine is very much more atomistic, and yet we look at everybody as the same. Chinese medicine is very holistic, and yet we really look at the individual person and how they're being affected. Does that make sense? So
Yeah, that makes sense.
if you have fibromyalgia in Western medicine, they're just like, oh, you have fibromyalgia, here's the possible treatments, blah, 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 blah. If you have fibromyalgia and you go to a Chinese doctor, you could have a problem with your liver energy. You could have a problem with dampness. You could have, those are probably the two main ones. And it's like, yeah, you're different, because we're not looking at the disease as one thing. We're looking at the person individually. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So
that makes much more sense than the way that people tend to be looked at in Western medicine.
yeah, but there's times where we need to fix the problem acutely. Surgery was developed in the West because that's how we see things. Antibiotics were developed in the West because that's how we see things. We see the tiny, tiny, piece here, but don't necessarily look at like how this person's being affected by their ear infection, and this person's being affected differently by their ear infection. So they complement each other. I want surgery, I want antibiotics, but I also want Chinese medicine because there's some things that it just treats better, like your eczema or your mom's pain. Yeah, so
Yeah,
I want both.
it's like what you were talking about with writing, like having all the available tools.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the reasons that I love writing more than anything else is that I see writing as a metaphor for everything in life. It's the lens that I look through everything. It's like uh I some problems are so huge that they overwhelm me, but uh some writing projects are so huge they overwhelm me. So what can I do today? Well, I can do this little bit and this little bit. And it's the same thing with life, and it's a great way to figure out yourself, figure out the human condition, figure out other people. I think, yeah, I'm a big fan, obviously.
Yeah, me
Yeah,
too.
so yeah, I don't do the greatest job of explaining traditional Chinese medicine because I'm not an expert, but basically it's a more holistic view of things. And so some people see it as woo woo. I see it as it's it's like a different language for health and wellness. It's like, who's to say that Chinese is better than English? Like, that's just silly. You can say, like, Chinese is probably better to say certain things or express certain feelings, or stories or whatever, and English is better for other things. I learned Norwegian. It's a very blunt, small language, and that's because that's how the people are. Like, they're very straightforward, and it's not better or worse. Like, there's a lot of things that I appreciate about Norway and Norwegian culture, uh, but there's a lot of things I appreciate about American culture. So let's just bring all of these tools together and use the ones that work best in each situation.
Yeah, very well put. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the only other thing that we were going to talk about is sexism. So
Sexism.
oh no, here we go. Okay. So
um,
why don't you just give me your general thoughts on that, cuz I was talking to you about the mixed mental arts episode in which you and Katie O'Brien were talking to Hunter and Brian about it.
yeah, and Claire Garrity Motts as well. She was there.
Yeah, that's who I forgot. I forgot that.
Three
Yeah.
ladies and two dudes. I mean, I don't know what my thoughts are on it. I think basically it's shitty when we discriminate against other people based on gender, skin color, age, nationality, whatever it is. Like, that's how I feel in general. I totally understand it. As a writer, I understand why we do the baser things in our lives. The feeling of having my own power taken away, or men feel like some of their power is getting taken away. I think that it's just like I said to Hunter and I did a separate podcast too before that, where I said, I don't even think of it necessarily as a problem that we need to cure. I think of it as something that's out of balance that we need to bring back into balance. I don't expect everybody to get along all the time. I am sexist lots of times. I don't think that sexist is or sexism, or like being sexist is a state that you can't change. I think it's something, it's just like stereotyping. It's like basically what it is, except forgetting at some point that it's just a stereotype. It's just a story that we've told to make sense of the world. And then when you're presented with new information, move beyond that story or adjust your story. Um, but yeah, I mean, as a woman, there's been lots of times where I haven't liked the way that I've been treated. And I don't want that to happen to people. I don't know. I mean, what you said that you disagreed with what we said. So I'm curious what you disagreed with, and then we can talk about that because it's such a huge topic and such a big thing that it's hard for me to pinpoint what to talk about.
Okay. Well, it honestly, it was a while ago when I listened to the
Mm-hmm.
podcast, so I just remember the general impressions that I got. But basically, I mean, I agree with most of what you said just there. Like, I think I wrote a blog a while ago, which is one of my ones following a theme, just comparing like extremists at opposite ends of the spectrum to each other and basically saying that they both think the same way. So I wrote
Yeah.
this blog called Radical Feminists and Misogynists Think the Same Way,
Mm-hmm.
just because like, the feminists who say like, bathe in male tears, kill all white men, all this kind of shit. They're just as sexist
Yeah,
as the men who blame women for all the world's problems.
absolutely.
Like it doesn't make sense to me to do that. And of course, and like, people are always sexist, of course. And like I have friends who are guys and friends who are women, and I generally talk to everyone the same way, but like occasionally, I'm saying a lot. uh
Oh my God, is Hunter Mott's here?
I know, right? Occasionally, sometimes it's easier for me to talk to my guy friends about like, oh, look, dude, that chick's hot.
Yeah,
And sometimes it's easier to talk to my female friends about my emotions or something like
sure.
that. So, but
Yeah,
I think that the general, based on the general impressions of that podcast, I just I I just remember agreeing more with Brian than everyone
sure.
else, just in the sense that maybe I mean, I'm sure, of course, there are problems with sexism, and obviously, I have no idea what it's like to be a woman. So obviously, my perspective is biased. But I think that people get carried away sometimes with solving the problem, just like in terms of like affirmative action or something like that, or like I'm sure rape is a problem too, for example, but like assuming that the guy who is accused is guilty without even doing any investigation into it or something like that. And I'm not saying that you have any of these thoughts. Those are
Yeah.
just the aspects of this that I disagree with.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you in all of those things. I think extremists on both sides are the same. I, I know Katie O'Brien pretty well and Claire Garrity Motz a little bit. Neither of them are extremists. I was there though before
Oh, I
the,
wasn't saying that
yeah,
anyone in that
yeah,
conversation
no.
seemed that
And
way to me.
so I
No.
think no, I agree 100%. I laugh sometimes when I hear people say like these feminists that are like bathe in the tears of men or whatever. It's like I don't know anybody like that. I know a lot of women. I have literally never met a woman that is a man hater. I mean, my best friend works with a lot of men, and she'll sometimes say, I don't like men anymore because I hang out with them so much. But she would never probably say that she was a feminist. Like she's conservative. But so I'm always kind of perplexed because I think my boyfriend's walking in. He just got home. But I'm always perplexed because I'm like, okay, I'm sure they're real people, but I feel like it's a very tiny minority, and that's just distracting us. The same with any extremist group. Like I think in general, most people are
It's probably the
somewhere
same
in
with
the
like
middle.
men's rights activists too, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't worry so much about those groups because I'm just like, you're loud and noisy, but how many people really think that way? I don't know. You know, I so yeah, so I agree extremism on both sides is bad. I think part of what's going on right now is that men and women are in echo chambers. You know, we don't see each other's side of it. Brian Callen actually, I don't know if he said it on the podcast, but he's told the story of walking down the street with Patty Jenkins when she was his girlfriend, and she was trying to explain to him because some guy like hollered at her or whatever, and he wanted to kill that guy. And she's like, if I tried to kill, oh, here's my kitty, this is Ellie. If I tried to kill every guy that did that, I would be in jail like from the age of 13 and never released because it happens all the time. And and guys don't notice it. And so she had him follow her by like 20 yards or something, and he saw it. He saw all the stuff that she had to put up with all the time. And so I think that a lot of men don't understand what it's like to be a woman where, you're constantly feeling I don't necessarily think of it as afraid, but you're constantly kind of feeling ogled a little bit, And I know from the man's perspective, it's like, well, can I not think someone's beautiful and whatever? And it's like, yes, that's totally fine. But, and most of that doesn't bother women, but it's when it starts to get a little bit more like invasive into our spaces that we get a little bit nervous. And as somebody on one of the podcasts described, it's like, imagine a giant linebacker comes up to you and says, oh, can I do this for you? Or, hey, you look nice, or whatever. It's like, you would feel a little bit afraid, a little bit nervous. Like, what are their intentions? So it's just about understanding that we're in echo chambers and we're coming at it from different perspectives. Yeah, like my goal is that we just all talk about it and feel okay talking about it. And if somebody does something that's inappropriate, we can just talk about it and not necessarily vilify them, as long as nobody gets killed or raped or murdered or whatever. My cat is really wanting my attention right now. But yeah, I mean, like I said, like I think of it less as a problem to cure and more of just like, how do we bring the balance back? How do we get men and women back into balance? Norway is a very egalitarian country, and women there dress super sexy sometimes, and guys like it. It doesn't mean, and they have a lot of sex, like a lot. They are the one night stand capital of the world, I'm convinced. But they've got
Sounds like I should move there.
Yeah, I mean, go for it. It's a great place.
Maybe particularly in my early 20s.
Yeah. Well, I moved there when I was in my early 30s, so anytime. But they have 40% of women in Parliament. America, I don't know what it is in Canada, but in America, I think it's 9 or 11%. Jordan Peterson likes to talk about nursing, but it's like, we'll talk about Parliament. 40% of women in Parliament. That's pretty awesome. Both men and women get paid parental leave, which I know they have in Canada as well, I think. So it's like we get distracted by the things that matter less, I think, and we get like pushed into our corners yelling at each other. And I don't want a world where women come up with all the solutions. I don't want a world where men come up all the solutions. I want us to figure it out together, because it's that dynamic pull between both sides, whether it's men and women, different countries, different cultures, different political parties. where we come up with the best solutions. So that's what I want. That's how I feel about sexism, really. I get angry about things, for sure. I get angry about Roman Polanski. I get angry about Harvey Weinstein, or Weinstein. I get, I have emotional reactions like everybody, and then sometimes I have to slow think through them and see that maybe we can find a middle ground.
Yeah, this is the best conversation I've had about this so far by
Oh,
far.
cool.
Like, very, very, very common. No one's getting angry or anything like that.
I
So
mean,
yeah, I totally agree with like pretty much everything you just said. Like us talking to each other about this is the most important thing to do. And what you said too reminded me of a few different examples too. Like I was like about in terms of perspective too. Like I've been rewatching the Star Wars movies, and I was watching The Empire Strikes Back last night, and I just keep thinking when I watch it now, holy fucking shit, Han Solo is a fucking sexist douchebag to Princess Leia, and he's like fucking borderline rapey in that
yeah.
movie. Like
Try
holy shit.
watching Back to the Future.
Oh yeah, I haven't watched
um,
that recently, like not since I was a kid.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
So yeah, and like also I've talked to my mom about that sort of thing before. We've talked many times about how, you know, I can go out for a walk in the forest by my house in the middle of the night and feel like I'm in no danger whatsoever. And my mom always feels like at least a mild sense of danger when she goes out at night, even though we don't even live in a dangerous
yeah.
neighborhood at all. And yeah, the only small piece of what you just said there, that made me think a little that I might have disagreed with a little bit is that, like, you know, in terms of like the percentage of women and men in parliament, like, to me, I just try to like evaluate people on merit in terms of that sort of thing. So like if it happens to be the case that there are that it's 100% women or 100% men or anything in between, I don't really think it matters that much. Although, I mean, I do understand that obviously historically women have had a much harder time, to say the least, than men. And I think it's good to encourage more women to get jobs like that. And obviously, our culture is biased against women seeking like positions of power, like political positions and stuff. So it's probably good to like change that cultural mindset about it.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I mean, I think it's complicated. I think, women are part of this culture, and there's stuff that we do and have done to hurt ourselves, and hold ourselves back. And so I don't like the whole idea of blaming one side or the other, because we're all in this together. We all live in a culture that none of us created, but we all have the opportunity to come up with solutions. I think it's important. I don't think things have to be 50-50. I think generally it's important to have a good representation of as many different groups as possible. And I'm not just talking about the color of your skin or your gender, but, rich, poor, uh, uh, different cultures, all of that, because the more different perspectives you put into the pot, the better solutions you're going to have. It's like a trivia team. You don't want to have all men on your trivia team, because then the one question about pap smears comes up and they can't answer it and they lose, you know? Um, that was a joke. but yeah, so I don't get so caught up in the number, but I will say that I think the idea of a merit-based system, and this is something that Brian Callen has changed his mind on, especially in the podcast with what's his name, who wrote about scarcity, uh, and how that, I think was it Johann Hari? Am I thinking of the wrong person? Anyways, he has
I'm not
changed
sure.
his
It
mind.
sounds familiar.
Yeah, I might have the wrong guy. I think it was Aldar Shafir. I think it was him, Eldar Shafir. Anyways, uh, like it's a simplistic view. It's easy to say, oh yeah, it's a merit-based system. Brian Callen came from upper middle class, white male background, and somebody else that had all these other hoops that they had to jump through. To say that it's just all on merit is a little simplistic. Nobody gets anywhere on their own.
I'm
So,
not saying it is all based on merit. I'm saying I think it should be based on merit.
oh, I agree. I agree. But first, I think we have to level the playing field a little bit. We have to make sure that everybody has the basic necessities to survive, so they're not wasting their time and energy figuring out how they're going to feed themselves or their family. We've got plenty of food, plenty of all of that. Let's just make sure everybody's cool. And then everybody can start attacking these collective problems that are huge that we need everybody's different ideas to figure out. And I don't think it's about agreeing. We don't ever have to agree. Like, in fact, I think once we all start agreeing, then that's a sign that there's an issue and we're creating a different echo chamber. So I don't think agreement is the goal either. I don't think eradication is the goal. I think balance, you know? It's part of it is my background in TCM, where it's like you start to understand that everything is a dynamic system and you're constantly adjusting here and there. You're never going to flatline and be like, oh, I've reached health. There it is. And never have to do anything differently. You're a power lifter, right? Like you're constantly adding more weight. You never are like,
I'm not anymore, but I
oh,
used to.
you're not.
Yeah. I
But
used
yeah,
to. Yeah.
but that's the idea, right? When you're weightlifting, you're constantly adding more weight and pushing your muscles, because if you just keep using the same weight, at some point your body's just going to be like, okay, I've adjusted, and that's it. And that's not healthy.
You're really good at making analogies.
Yeah. I'm so sorry, but I have to run. I have to go to work. This was super fun.
Okay. All right.
Thank you
Well,
so
yeah,
much.
thanks.
I don't have to leave this second. Did you have any? I just have to go pretty in the next couple of minutes. Did you have any final
Okay.
thoughts or final things?
Um, no, not really. I mean, the just to what we were talking about, like yeah, like I think we're what you said about agreement is good too. Like we don't have to, like people don't have to agree with each other, but just like tolerate each other regardless of how much you agree or disagree with someone. That's one of the things I love about mixed mental arts so much too. It's like there's so many people with different perspectives and different lives, and it's so great to be able to just talk with so many people about so many different issues, whether you and sometimes agree, sometimes disagree, and you'll figure out each other's ideas and understand other ideas better. And like it seems like if you just keep an open mind, you always come away thinking, we're all more similar than different, always.
Yeah.
And like I, I I think I still probably almost completely agree with your thoughts on sexism too. I just yeah, and and what you said about Brian Callen too reminded me on I think on his more recent Joe Rogan podcast, I think he was saying that in that MMA podcast that we were talking about, that it made him think that, I hadn't really thought about it from a woman's perspective as much before. And, that's something I always try to be conscious of too, that, like in the same way that women don't understand what it's like to be a man and they can make generalizations about men don't understand what it's like to be women and they can make generalizations about women, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And we're all guilty of it.
Yeah.
Um, and I think, it just goes back to naive realism, remembering that we are all limited, we're all biased. We need each other to see the whole elephant. And we don't have to agree about everything all the time, but just because you disagree with somebody who they voted for, or even if you're Daryl Davis and you're literally talking to people that are in the KKK, he
I've
still finds
mentioned
a
I've mentioned that guy for like the last 3 podcasts now.
yeah, he's pretty amazing. Because I think Di Canfield wrote about it on the Facebook page today. He's not a superhero. He doesn't have any magic powers that we all don't have. He just understands that it's about making a connection with people. As well as, I just listened to the podcast with the hostage negotiator that they had on, whose name escapes me. And he does the same thing. He's like, I talk to people that have beat the shit out of their wives and are holding people hostage, whatever. I don't agree with them. I'm not like, yeah, you should beat your wife, but I can understand, hey, you had a really hard time. That must really feel bad, feel awful, whatever. And my goal is to get them out of that situation, have as many people safe as possible. And that is our goal. That should be our goal for planet Earth, like,
Totally.
I don't have to agree with you, but I'm not you. So I'm sure you have valid reasons for the way that you feel. We can talk through them, or we can find other things to connect on.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Well said. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, we can end it here now if you want, unless you probably need to go right away anyway, right?
Yeah, I have
Yeah.
to eat some food real quick and run to work. I have
Okay.
about 20 minutes before I have
Okay.
to go.
All
So
right. Well, yeah,
sorry
thanks.
about the
Thank
time
Oh, no
confusion. I'm
problem.
terrible with time changes. I
Oh
always
yeah.
think
Well, that
everybody's
ended up
later.
giving us more time to talk anyway,
Yeah,
right?
that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
yeah, thanks so much for talking with me, and I hope we can do it again many times for sure.
Yeah, me too.
And
I'll see you on the MMA chats, and then I'm gonna try and start listening to your novel. I'm really interested
oh yeah,
in
awesome.
hearing that. So
Awesome. Yeah, so I'll just say the things that I like to say at the end of all of my
sure,
videos here, and then you can give any plugs that you have if you want. All right.
sure.
Okay, so thanks so much, everyone, for watching. I love you all. Thank you so much to everyone who's already my patron on Patreon, and thank you so much to everyone who's subscribed to my YouTube channel. And thank you so fucking much to anyone else who becomes my patron on Patreon or subscribes to my channel. You have no idea how much that means to me. And also, most importantly, as I always like to say, always remember this: the funk cures all.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Okay, so do you want to plug like your documentary and stuff there?
It's a work in progress, so there's not really much to plug. If people want to yell at me or contact me, they can find me on Twitter at Cataclysmic. That's CATECLYSMIC. Or they can find me on the Mixed Mental Arts Facebook page. I hang out there sometimes. But yeah, I
I'll add your Twitter for the description of this video.
cool. Well, thanks, Andrew. That was fun.
Yeah, thanks so much for talking with me. All right.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. All right, everyone. Adios. Until next time.
Bye.